Well, hello, everybody. I'm Tom Murray, the Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools, a project of All for Ed located in Washington, D.C. Future Ready Schools is a collaboration between All for Ed and a vast coalition of over 60 national and regional partners. The goal of Future Ready Schools is to maximize learning opportunities for all students and to help school districts move quickly towards student-centered learning. The effort provides educators with resources and support to ensure that local strategic and technology plans align with instructional best practices, are implemented by highly trained teachers, and maximize personal and authentic learning experiences for all students, particularly those from historically underserved communities. As always, the hashtag for today's event is Future Ready. Thank you for making an investment in your time and for joining us. I'm your host on this webinar on such a vital topic, reducing special education or special educator stress and burnout. I'm not sure where we could have a more important topic today or a more needed topic today at a more relevant time. And I have three incredible guests that'll be joining us today. We have Melissa Cordo, a former special education teacher and the co-founder of one of our partners, Education Modified. We have Nicole Fitch. Nicole is the executive director of student services in the Snoqualmie Valley School District in Washington. And last but not least, we have Keith Neese. Keith is the supervisor of special education in the Fairview School District in Pennsylvania. What an honor it is to have the three of you here today. I gave a really quick intro. If we could jump over to Nicole, if you could go a little bit deeper, tell us about your district, your role, and say a quick hello.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole. Thanks for having me. I'm the executive director of student services. So I oversee preschool through 21 special education services. I oversee behavioral health, 504s, McKinney-Vento, nursing. I support counselors. I support Title IX. I'm the compliance officer for HIB as well. So broad swath of areas that I cover. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Keith, over to you.
Thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Keith Neese. I am the Director of Special Education in the Fairview School District, where I have been here for 22 years and a former special education teacher myself for 15 years in the same district. My role now includes overseeing all of our special education programs, including students on IEPs, all of our teachers, all of our paraprofessionals. I also work closely with all of our kids who have Chapter 504 service agreements. And obviously I wear many other hats, one including our English language learner population. I oversee all of those. I work daily with and collaborate daily with our building level administrators and all of our teachers within our district. And I'm excited to be here today.
Well, thanks, Keith. And for all of us admin, the other duties as assigned, right? I think we could all relate to that one there as well. Melissa, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, super excited to be here. I am the co-founder and CEO of Education Modified. I was a special ed teacher in New York City public schools for 9 years. I was in the classroom. I led our inclusion model with my director at the high school at the time. I was a co-teacher. I was the first co-teacher in our building. By the time I left, we had 14 co-teaching teams across grades 9 through 12. And yeah, I'm really excited to have this discussion with you all today.
Well, thank you so much for each joining us and investing your time to share your expertise and experiences. You know, the pandemic has forced all of us to reflect, to reframe, to reprioritize much of our everyday life. And for educators, it really has brought a refocus on the human side of the work. We know that relationships really are the foundation of effective practices and that students and teachers have encountered many unexpected challenges over 2 straight years. From coast to coast, teachers have expressed high levels of stress, anxiety, and have been, let's be real, leaving the profession at a very alarming rate. In fact, just this past January, the National Education Association, the NEA, surveyed its members and uncovered 90% of its members say that feeling burned out is a serious problem. 86% has said that they've seen more educators leaving the profession or retiring early since the start of the pandemic. And 80% also report that unfilled job openings have led to more work obligations, for those that are left. And let's be real, in special education, those feelings and numbers are even more daunting. So although there's certainly no simple solution by any means, these are very complex issues. We also recognize educators are doing all they can to solve them. The issues really are complex, and school and district leaders are problem solving, and we're really working to find solutions. And that's what we want to talk through today. So let's go ahead and dive in. So here's the first question that I want to wrap our heads around if I could. See, the pandemic has been a tremendous challenge for all educators, from the classroom to district office. And I'll add for students as well, and for parents as well. As classroom teachers work diligently to develop solutions for remote or hybrid or in-person learning or any combination that it's been in the past 2 years, special education teachers have had to do that, but then also balance the various classrooms, various grade levels, and varying student needs, all of which made these issues even more complex for our special educators. So let's start by talk to us about what makes up the workload of special education teachers and how it's been affected by the pandemic. So reflect a little bit in the last 2 years. Keith, I'm going to ask you, can you get us started on that conversation?
Absolutely. First off, I think there's nothing more rewarding than being a special education teacher, because you work with and can impact a population that probably needs you most, and that's our students with disabilities. Our special education teachers wear a variety of hats. They have to manage paperwork, meet deadlines. They have to manage people, paraprofessionals, general education teachers, private nurses, agency support. They have to collaborate with all those people as well. Communication, where they're constantly having to inform parents, address parent concerns, track and monitor student progress, adapt and modify content, develop instructional lessons and differentiate instruction, deal with conflict a lot and problem solve, and then make lesson plans to meet the variety of learners within their class, where a one-size-all approach doesn't work. I think that the pandemic took away the one thing that special education teachers and students need the most. That was the face-to-face interaction that those students crave, that those students need on a day-to-day basis in order to succeed. Now, what the pandemic did is it interrupted routine. It took away and made learning quite difficult for those students with disabilities, because that support that they relied on each day became harder to do through a screen. And then as a result, I think our special education teachers had to be more innovative, creative, more flexible than ever. They kind of had to reset the start button, or they had to reset and start over. They had to watch students who made progress in their classes begin to struggle. Teachers had to change their mindset. They had to find ways for students to support students that they never knew existed, deliver materials to houses. And I think because of all that that's on their plate, that they're so used to doing in that day-to-day, face-to-face mode, all that stress began to pile on. And stressful in a face-to-face situation, it became more stressful to try to complete all those tasks, through a screen, basically.
Absolutely. Nicole, we're going to jump to the other side of the country, out to Washington, where you are. Talk to us about what you're seeing special ed teachers and their workload and how the pandemic's impacted that.
Well, I think one of the bright points has been the relationships with families, because this is the first time our teachers were in the kitchens and the living rooms and in the bedrooms of kids being on screen. That's changed the dynamic and the relationships with families and guardians. And it's made it more complex, because everyone's around the table and can see the teaching and they can see what needs to happen quickly, or what's not happening. And so that's created a more intense feedback loop for our teachers and our building leaders. So in a way, it's been wonderful, because we've been able to have those Zoom IEP meetings and schedule SDI online with kids. But on the flip side, it's created some real demands and need to prioritize time for special educators. So one of the things they've really been practicing is managing time and managing communication, volumes of emails and communication logs, which we saw really increase for students' accommodations during the pandemic. So that additional press on teachers' time has been something that has stressed them out, and also brought a level of inside information to families around what happens during the school day. And so it's really changed parents and guardians' understanding of what teaching looks like and how it is and what the curriculum is and whether it fits or not, and invited a lot of ideas, opinions, and just as I said, really broadened the feedback loop with families. So that's put additional pressures on some of our educators.
Yeah, absolutely well said. And I'll step in. And I probably should have said it from the get-go. I want to thank the educators and all that they've done and all that they've been through and just working tirelessly. And, in both of your responses, we hear that and just the ways that they continue to break down walls and do what's needed the best that they can, even with such fear and trauma and anxiety and all the things that are happening. Now, Melissa, to jump over to you, you have a different view. I mean, as a special educator yourself, you've lived what they've talked through, but you get to work with so many districts around the country. So you kind of see it almost like we do from a national level where you see so many different districts. So you get to interact with many folks like these fine folks from across the country. Tell us what else you're seeing or you're hearing from other districts.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about special ed is that those who are in it have actually been talking about the workload for decades, way before the pandemic. Deborah Ziegler from the Council for Exceptional Children was quoted in 2014 saying that being a special ed teacher was like having two full-time jobs. No, that was almost 10 years ago now. NPR did a special in 2015. It was titled Behind the Shortage of Special Ed Teachers, Long Hours and Crushing Paperwork. And so that has been, unfortunately, this is not new, right? And that the workload of special ed teachers, while it is so rewarding, I mean, it was the highlight of my life was working with students. The workload is really pretty tough. And so I think what happened was that the pandemic really pushed people over the edge and highlighting some of that workload because it was not transferable, right? A lot of that communication and documentation, the paperwork was not transferable when everyone was at home. And so that pushing of paper, that quick, communication with someone in the hallway when that wasn't possible, when people weren't in schools, all of that was really highlighted, and that it's really not sustainable. I think one thing that we hear now is that, districts really want to try to rethink how we've been doing it. And that the pandemic has kind of highlighted that chance to be like, instead of, well, this is just kind of how we've always done it. Now let's really try to rethink this, right? Because we couldn't attract or retain special ed teachers before. And now we're really seeing those shortages at levels that, are pretty unimaginable. And so I think district leaders like folks we have here today are also being creative and innovative and having to think outside the box when it comes to solutions and reducing workload and creating efficiencies in the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I put myself back to being a principal at the elementary level and at the secondary level. And I can think about my special education teachers. I've been reflecting as you've been talking. First of all, they were just some of the greatest people on the planet, some of the best educators on the planet. But I also know in reality, some of the first there each day, some of the last to leave each day, some of those that would work throughout the weekend because of that paper trail or all the paperwork, because different grade levels, different areas, different students, IPs, all the pieces that are on their plate. But the pandemic's really amplified so much of this even more. So let's build on what we just talked about. As special education teachers really have and always work to meet the needs of diverse needs of students, the pandemic's also really taken a toll on student and educator health, mental health, and wellness. And so let's talk about some common stress factors for special ed teachers and really how they can best be supported. So what are we doing to support them, to recognize, to call out the mental health and the wellness? It's real issues that we have to focus on. So who'd like to jump in?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think, some of the things we touched on in that first question, obviously, meeting deadlines, keeping up with the paperwork, common stress factor for special education teachers. Let's be real about it. There's conflict sometimes in special education with all the legalities behind it. So, dealing with conflict, unhappy parents in things like that, maybe conflict with general education teachers because you share kids and things like that. Meeting the needs of, you have a caseload of 20 kids and all 20 of those kids are at a different level or have different needs. Trying to ensure that all 20 kids get what they need. it can be a stress factor. And one thing that I, looking at these questions is, one thing I want to highlight is, just teachers want to be appreciated. They want that support. And when there's a lack of appreciation and support, that stress is just going to get worse. They want all teachers, not just special education teachers, they want to be appreciated. And when they're not, that stress tends to increase. So those are just some of the common stress factors that I see. And then obviously, as maybe we come back around, I have some ways that we can support or combat some of those things as well.
Yeah, let's do that. So other stressors, Nicole, Melissa, jump in.
I would say one of the stressors we're facing are public records requests too for special educators. There's a lot of interest politically in what our schools and school boards are doing. And sometimes that trickles down to our classroom teachers and our special educators and our therapists, such as speech language providers or our occupational therapists. And when we have conflict, public records requests and legalities such as that can really create anxiety. I was just working with a teacher the other day who had a lot of anxiety and she was feeling really scrutinized. And she's, gosh, one of the best speech language pathologists we have. And she said, how do I deal with this? I didn't do anything wrong. And it just breaks my heart. So one of the ways, that on top of teaching and collaboration, the relationships within the school and people being tired can really turn into a difficult workplace for our teachers right now. One of the things I've tried to do is to listen, really let people talk and listen in. I've tried to give them permission to let go of things. We only have certain things in our control. And although you may be having feelings about the other things coming at you, whether from the community or from a parent or from another teacher or from a student that's having a bad day, just permission to let it go and only take home a little bit of it with you. And the final thing I'll say is I try to model the way. And for example, when the speech language pathologist said, oh, I have this records request coming through, it's making me very anxious. I said to her, and that's why I'm in therapy too. And so just trying to really be, and that's really big for me to be able to say, but as someone who's been an educator and a classroom teacher and a building leader, I have to let them know too, I feel it as well. And this is what I'm doing for myself. And I want to welcome you to this conversation with me because I'm also having a bad day and it's okay. So just trying to really let people know that I'm not at the district office, like I'm not in some ivory tower. I'm right there with you and I'm feeling the conflict as well. And we still have students, regardless of a pandemic or the political climate, students need us and we love them. So that's what we're here for.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your own vulnerability, but that humility, that modeling the way, such key factors there as well. Melissa, let's jump over to you and then we'll go back over to Keith to be able to talk, give him some ideas, some practical ideas that we can share to help those watching today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we hear a lot from both our district leaders as well as our teachers, and one thing that I personally experienced was the weight of having to keep everybody else informed, particularly like the general ed staff, right? One thing that's not really talked about is that the onus of keeping general educators informed is mostly lands on the special ed teachers' shoulders, right? So like anytime an IEP is updated or providing strategies or resources or having someone come up to me, what do you do about, Johnny, and like really having that kind of responsibility while it's, really important for the student. It's a lot for one teacher. I was a co-teacher at one semester. I would have 3 co-teachers at a time. Right. And so one of the things we focus here on Education Modified, and, we do research and development is what can we take off teachers' plates? What can we take off special ed teachers' plates? That's one thing we can do with technology, is having to take that onus off the special ed teacher to keep everyone informed, when really simple technology tools can do that. And I think, really professionalizing the special ed teacher by giving them the tools that they need to actually do the jobs that we're asking them to do is what we focus on here at EdMod.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll tell you, every educator listening right now, when you said take off their plate, was like, now you're speaking my language, right? Because that's hardly we hear that. It's often here's something additional, here's something additional. Now we also need to, but to be strategic in saying we're removing this because we recognize the time barriers is vital there. So Keith, back over to you. Solutions, or not, I shouldn't say solutions, probably not the best term, strategies that you have or that you're leading at district offices to support our special ed teachers.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, relationships and knowing, and your teachers knowing that you care about them outside of their workday. You know, simple things of saying, "How you doing? How's your family doing?" Simple questions like that, in many conversations like that. I think that can go a long way, and teachers know that you care more about them than just the 9-10 hours that they're in the school that day. So building relationships, making that a priority, highlighting their accomplishments, giving them positive feedback. You know, something we do in our district is I have little cards that say choose to include, and when teachers are doing nice things, gen ed teachers and special ed teachers, I just shoot them a nice card and say, you know, thank you for being so positive in that IEP meeting. Every other Friday, I send out a special education report to our special education teachers and building level administrators that just highlight great things our teachers are doing in their classroom. You know, we're all human. And when teachers are being recognized for the great work that they're doing, I think that can go a long way. And then I want to piggyback with what Melissa said. I think anything you can do as a leader to take something off those teachers' plates, it can go a long way as well. So I've worked hard in the last couple of years of trying to take some of those, tasks that might not be as important for a classroom teacher, to bring them back to my office, to take them off their plate, can certainly help.
Yeah, and put my principal hat back on. You know, anytime we can give time back, time is always one of the struggles. We can't invent any more of it. But, you know, if that person doesn't really need to be at that meeting, can we free them up, or can they just be at a small part to give back, whether it's a faculty meeting, part of an in-service day, whatever it might be, just to make sure we're allowing them to use their time in the best way to support students possible. So let's go ahead and tackle some traditional struggles in special education and how some of these common, let's say, inefficiencies can increase anxiety, decrease student success rates, and ultimately put districts in legal hot water. So let's go ahead and talk, if we can, about some of the things that we're seeing in this area, just some traditional struggles, whether it's communication or there's so many teachers, what that might look like. Nicole, let's jump back over to you if we could start there. What are some of the traditional, and maybe I'm a superintendent that's never been, you know, you see things from a district lens, but maybe you've never been that special ed teacher or whatnot. Let's kind of give some nuts and bolts as to some of the traditional struggles we see in special education here.
I think some of the software we use is definitely one of the areas in data management, information management. So the pandemic let us see very clearly where the cracks are in our systems. And this is a time for repair. So it's an opportunity. I know that's probably a really overused word right now, but it has allowed us to have a back and forth conversation and really get feedback from our teachers on what's working and what's not with our IEP software. And then also the ease at which we get at our 504s, so our classroom teachers in some comprehensive high schools. When you have a whole bunch of students and you have students with IEPs and 504s, multilingual learners, accelerated learners in one class, how do we get that information to teachers and get it in their hands really quickly? Well, two things we did. Number one, we have listened to our teachers and improved our IEP software. So we've actually changed the way it looks, the way they enter information to make it more efficient and to make it more intuitive. And we've also added Ed Modify so that our classroom teachers can do they can quickly scan and see who gets what and when, instead of having to go, when I was a teacher, because I was a teacher for 9 years, like Melissa in New York, I was given files and they were locked in the file cabinet back in 2001, and I had to go through all the papers to get the IEP information, and that's not the case anymore. So we were able to listen to our teachers and say, hey, you need some information more quickly because information is moving really fast right now, and you want to help your kids on day one or before day one so that you're not in October wondering what are the accommodations that my kiddos on IEPs are going to get during state testing. So that's where Ed Modified has come in to give us that quick capture and ease of use to support students in the areas they need it.
Sure. Every educator can relate to what you just said. That's for sure. Keith, what about you? What are you seeing in some of those traditional struggles? I know we've touched on some already, but what additional would you add there?
Yeah, just some general struggles in special education that can lead to obviously legal trouble. I think in being ineffective in your communication with both gen ed teachers, but parents as well. Not listening, not understanding, and not addressing parent concerns and trying to put them off. You know, data is big in special education, so ensuring that you have a baseline, you're collecting that data, you're able to monitor and show progress and things like that. And then obviously, as special education students share these students, and inclusion is bigger and better than ever. I think it's really important that our special education teachers and our gen ed teachers have a great relationship, and the needs are met in both type of environments. And I think Nicole touched upon it there. We're new to Education Modified this year. We actually we started that process at the beginning of the year, but that platform, that software, and I'm in a district where we're one-to-one iPad K to 12, so we're real tech heavy, and we use also another platform called Schoology as our learning management system, and because of that, the Education Modified has been able to get information on our students with IEPs in 504s at the fingertips of our gen ed teachers, all in one spot. And now that helps streamline that process of collaboration. It helps better meet the needs of all learners because that information is there. It's easy to access, it's easy to get. And really keeping it real here, our reg ed teachers don't have the excuse to say, I didn't know about this kid. I didn't know he needed that. And those are some of the things when students aren't getting what they need in those classrooms can get you into some hot trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to put my own parent hat on, I have two children, and we'll share as I think through this. My daughter has very significant food allergies, and we've worked through some therapies and things. And we're the parents that'll say, hey, we need to meet. Hey, we need to have a conversation at the beginning of the year. But how easy it is from that, especially, and not a knock against teachers. They've got so much on their plates, but for my daughter, somebody like her, we're talking a true life or death possibility situation here where oh, I forgot about that meeting in August isn't going to cut it to parents when something happens there. And so that communication, there's so many things on their plate. And again, that's not a knock against educators at all. That's just the reality of there's so much information, so many accommodations for so many kids to just try and keep it, in a filing cabinet somewhere. Lots of things fall through the crack really, really quickly. And I can use my parent lens to see that as well. Melissa, what from your own experience, but also from the many districts that you're working with, talk to us about just some of the traditional struggles that you see.
Yeah, I mean, the communication piece is so important. Like, I truly believe it can change the life of a student, and that simple information. And from my own experience of, hey, when Johnny isn't making eye contact, it's not because he's being disrespectful. It's because, that's a result of, his behavior of being on the autism spectrum. And that simple nugget of information for a general ed teacher to have and to be able to use with Johnny is just literally so impactful and so important that it can change that entire relationship, right, with that student. And I think having that information just readily available all the time. And when you have, like you said, so many people to communicate with, that is the traditional struggle of special ed, having so many stakeholders. The IEP team is every teacher that's with that student, any outside service providers, including the school psychologist, the district leader, and the parents really make up the IEP team. So keeping everyone informed and on the same page all the time is really difficult, but also can be so impactful, right? Like 2 heads are better than 1, 3 heads are better than 2. And so when we can all work together in real time, it can really make a huge difference. And then lastly, transparency. When we talk to parents of students with IEPs or 504s, and my mom is one, the biggest thing that they want is transparency. If a child is not meeting their goals, but as a parent, I am confident that my school and my teachers are doing the best that they can possibly do, then there's no hostility, right? Or need to move into litigation. But if mom or dad has no idea what's going on in the classroom, or no communication from staff, or no proof that their child is getting their accommodations, then that's where, there can be a lot of trouble. And that's really where the stress comes in, right? And that, the teachers and case managers and district leaders are doing tremendous amounts of work all the time. But if there's no easy way to communicate that, then that's really lost. And that's really where that lack of communication can become a huge problem.
Yeah, Melissa, you're making me think back to some of those litigation pieces that I'd be a part of, whether as a principal or even at district office. And, just thinking through having to backpedal to what did we do? What were those dates? When did we meet? When were those? I mean, the hours and hours that are spent and we hope it doesn't hit that point, but the reality, it's going to hit that point at times. To have to backpedal to pull some of that without the solid record keeping in place and those types of things, there's significant barriers there if we're not really proactive in our process, our protocols, and the way that looks as well. Keeping that principal hat on for me, I can certainly speak firsthand to some of the traditional challenges that we just talked about in special education, with workflows, with communication, with some of the technologies that are there, some of the reporting pieces that are there. Let's talk a little bit further. And I know, Nicole, you started to dive into naturally some of the things that have been helping, which is good, and related to technology. Let's talk a little bit more about technology and special education, and really what needs to be done to make special education future ready. I mean, let's be real. We've made a lot of advances in some of these areas, but many times we're going over here for the grade book, we're going over here for attendance, we're going over here for accommodations, we're going over here for IEP software, we're going over here. And so what happens, things get lost in translation. People don't know how to access certain things. So talk to us about some of the technology, some of the shifts you've made in your districts to support special ed teachers. So Nicole, back over to you. Anything you want to add to what you were sharing earlier related to technology?
Sure. Well, I've worked in past life on a data dashboard that we use in a different district, and that enabled us to pull student information from our SIS, our student information system, our IEP software, and I believe from our software that housed interventions and our lost instructional log. So those were different areas that we entered, that teachers and building leaders entered student data. And I've had the experience of going through a process that made we used Tableau, and it made visualizations of who the students were, what their demographics are, what schools they were at, which communities they came from, what their attendance behavior, all those pieces. And it really came together beautifully. And I've only seen that in one district. And I've been in this business now for 25 years, I would say. So that is an area that's really lacking. We need a centralized location so special educators and district leaders are not going to 5 different Excel spreadsheets to get information on if a student was in class, what the progress monitoring notes look like, and what the demographic of that program looks like at that particular school to ensure that we're not being disproportionate. So that's something that we're really in need of in special ed and across, I'm sure across the country, is centralized location for data.
Yeah, going back to the theme, reducing special educator burnout and stress, right? I mean, we think about it, inefficiencies create exactly what we're talking about. The extra time when they've got to go to 42 different places, create the burnout feel, the extra time that they don't have. And so when you talk about that example from that district, making it efficient saves them time, reduces frustration. I mean, let's be real. How many times I can't figure out how to log into this one piece over there, and then I'll access it for months, right? And some of those issues, not even just from a legal end, also start to pile up, which increase stress, which increase anxiety, going back to the overall mental health. So let's jump over. Keith, go ahead and add from a technology end what you've seen as well.
I think first and foremost, obviously we live in a world that now is controlled by technology. So as a district, making a decision and committing to, listen, we're going to make our district more tech savvy. We want to move to that direction of being more future ready. I think you need to make that decision, and then you need to make that commitment. And then next, I think you need to then ensure that your students, your staff, get the devices in their hands, and then you're offering that professional development and things like that. I had mentioned earlier, our district made that commitment probably 7 years ago to go one-to-one, where we went one-to-one iPads. Every student K to 12 has an iPad in our district. And then as the pandemic occurred, we then equipped all of our teachers with MacBooks, with cameras and things like that. So we were able to stream our instruction during the pandemic as kids and students were at home. But on top of that, we didn't stop there. I think then to equip and give our teachers those resources in a tech world. So in our district, we've moved to some platforms where the curriculum, the textbooks are all online. We use a student information system. We have a learning management system that are all online. We moved in a special education world to some progress monitoring tools that are all online. So we've not only equipped our students and our teachers with those devices, but then now we're incorporating the platforms that can be incorporated and used with those devices. So like you said, teachers aren't going in this drawer looking for this book, or students aren't coming to class unprepared. It's all within that one device. But I think that takes a mindset, a commitment, and then as a district being able to follow through and give your students and teachers what they need.
Yeah, well said there, Keith. And Melissa, going back to you, if I could, again, you work with so many districts across the country that use different platforms and different tools. And so your view is a bit different. Talk to us about what you're seeing, how that's evolved, how it's supported to make things more efficient. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Keith hit the nail on the head when it's really about making a commitment to that technology, right? Of like facing the fact head on that we've made a lot of strides in inclusion with special education, meaning that we're serving more kids in more, less restrictive environments, but that has increased the special ed teachers' professional tasks exponentially as a result, right? And so really leveraging technology and giving teachers, just like any other profession, the technology that they need to do the jobs that we're asking them to do, right? The tremendous amount of documentation, communication, administrative paperwork. Data is something we hear a lot from our districts. One thing I think people don't realize about special ed is that most data in special education is qualitative data and not quantitative data. And being able to really get that information into teachers' hands and being able to centralize it in one place has been one of the things that we work with districts all over the country, and really focusing that so that their teachers don't have to be doing it, and technology can really solve that problem for them. And really taking the steps, like it can be a lot of work to really make those digital transformations, but taking those steps, being committed as a special ed department. We've seen these the gains in education technology. And I think special ed has really lagged behind in that. And so catching up with the rest of the departments when it comes to, curriculum and things like that, really making that commitment. And we hear more and more special ed leaders and district leaders making that commitment on the special ed side.
Yeah, which is great. So I want to dive into kind of one more main theme before we start to wrap it up, and that's around communication. And no matter what group at Future Ready we're working with, communication always comes up. It's come up multiple times already in this webinar. Communication in special education, let's face it, it's always been a challenge. So many different ways, because there's so many people involved. There's parents, there's students, a variety of different teachers, all the different pieces there. So let's talk specifically about communication between special ed and general ed teams, why it's so important, what's often lacking, and how this communication and workflow can be improved. Because again, inefficiencies create burnout, inefficiencies create stress. Going back to our theme for all of these, improved communication is going to help those things as we try and not just call out these issues, but support what we're talking about to support our teachers. How can we improve communication in these areas to better support our teachers, our parents, our students? What can that look like? Nicole, let's go back over to you.
From the systems level, my first answer would be creating master schedules for teachers at the elementary level and the middle school and high school that allow for time for teacher collaboration. And one of the things we're really dying on the vine with right now is just that time with teachers for professional development. Some of the reasons we're having struggles with that is the difficulty finding substitute teachers, difficulty getting difficulty getting with our agreements with teachers unions and making those commitments to time that districts and building leaders can have with teachers, and then time that teachers need with teachers. So there's a lot of communication and negotiations that go there. And with a master schedule that has time built in for interventions and specially designed instruction, you can, and planning and case management time, you can build it into the day, which has to be a really intentional choice district-wide. I would say the other piece that allows for communication or allows for us to manage expectations around communication is parent education. Because when we have kiddos in elementary school, their circle of teachers is smaller. And as kids rise up, they have many, many more teachers, and it's like concentric circles. So allowing districts or giving time for districts and buildings to educate families and being transparent about what the journey looks like for a kiddo on an IEP who's young versus a teenager is essential, has been essential, but it's definitely a missing component for a lot of districts.
Yeah, so well said. So Keith, let's jump back over to you. Talk to us, continue the conversation on what's lacking often with communication and how we can improve this workflow.
I think first and foremost, just in something that, at times you feel it changing, but then there's times it doesn't, is that mentality of us versus them. General ed teachers saying to special ed teachers, these are your kids. They're not mine. And I, in a way I get that. When you have 30 kids in a class and then you have these 5 special ed kids with a variety of needs, and you have all these other things going on, it's tough to meet all those needs. So then it becomes, these are your kids, you deal with them, you give them what they need. I think first and foremost, we need to try to change that mentality where these are our kids. They're your responsibility and my responsibility together to give them what they need. I think if we can kind of tap into that and make a change in that mentality, I think that would go a long way. But just some other things, having a system in place, having some type of platform, so gen ed teachers and reg ed teachers, parents and special ed teachers, so on and so forth. If you give them the time in the platform to communicate, I think that would break down some barriers as well. And then obviously, from a school standpoint, allowing and giving opportunities for that collaboration to happen. Just something to highlight in our district, once a month, we have something called learning support team meetings where myself, all of our learning support team teachers, our school psychologists, it's a way for us just to collaborate. They're scheduled for the whole year. And then we have clinical support teams where we do the same for our autistic support programs as well. So we actually built in time once a month for us to sit down, collaborate, discuss issues and things like that. So having a system in place, providing the time for your teachers, I think can help.
Yeah, absolutely. That time is key, but the communication, I'm thinking back to what you first said and just the language that we use, your students, my students versus our students, right? And there's a lot of that finger pointing, which also leads to a lot of assumptions. Oh, I thought you were doing that accommodation down in your room. Oh, I'm supposed to be. How many times does that conversation have? Again, inefficiencies. So what happens to teachers? Stress goes up, anxiety goes up, burnout, that feeling of like, I can't even do this anymore. Those things are much more prone to happen when communication is poor or not where it needs to be. And those inefficiencies are key. So Melissa, again, your lens, you've done this in the classroom and now working with so many districts. Talk to us about what you're seeing with communication.
Yeah, I mean, what Nicole said about setting expectations for communication and then sticking to those expectations, we've seen huge success with some of our districts, and that's setting expectations with everybody. So, hey, general education teachers, this is where you're going to go to find this information instead of bothering the case manager, emailing so-and-so, or trying to find this here. This is where you're going to go for this, and then this is where you're going to go to communicate this. Setting expectations for the documentation of that communication has always been a struggle, right? There's the communication and then there's because of the legality of the special ed world, the documentation that we had this communication, right? And so setting those expectations as well, and that every communication you have is an educational record that will be pulled. So district leaders setting those expectations of like, hey, this is where we communicate about our special ed kids. This is where we communicate about our students with 504s. And then as Nicole mentioned as well, then setting the expectations with parents. Hey, this is where you can communicate most easily with all of the folks who are your students' teachers. And again, the difference between that elementary and that middle school versus that high school student that has 7 different teachers and a case manager and a guidance counselor, right? And so being able to be really clear about that with all stakeholders, our district leaders have seen a lot of success. And then just getting back to that documentation of that communication is so hard. And that's really where we can streamline it using technology. Having to dive through every single person's email that has ever been in contact with this student, and when you get pulled for a record review, our district said it takes 80 to 100 hours, right? And so having a different platform, having a system in place to have that communication easily accessible has saved our districts a lot of time. And again, that reducing of stress, right? The inefficiency. There's nothing more frustrating than being like, having to waste my time doing this when really all I want to be doing is teaching my students, right? Or working on my lessons or collaborating with my co-teacher. Instead, I'm, spending 10 hours trying to find this one email. That's really what pushes teachers over the edge.
Yeah, so well said. So we're up against our time. So I'm going to ask one final question. I'm going to ask you to give 30 seconds or less. We have so many people watching today, superintendents, principals, classroom teachers, regardless of what their role is, regardless of where they are in any sort of continuum of implementing anything we talked about today. What's one piece of advice you'd have for your colleagues across the country in this area? Nicole, you're first.
Spend time building relationships and listening to your teachers and building leaders. That is going to be the key to shifting mindsets, supporting people's well-being, and encouraging and building their efficacy. That's what I got for you.
Well said. Sorry that I struggled with my mute button. Here we are in 2022, right? We've all been there. Keith, over to you if you could.
Yep, real quick. I have 3 little tidbits. I think they all go together. I think Nicole said it well there. Care about the people, build those relationships beyond the hallways, serve others. Somebody told me when I got into administration, the piece of advice I got is be available and be visible. So I try to do both of those things every day. And then the last thing is you don't know everything, so don't act like it. And I think it's important as an administrator to not walk those halls in thinking that you know everything and you're going to change the world by what you're telling them every day. And I think that goes along with caring about the people, listening to them, and building those relationships.
Yeah, so brilliantly said. That vulnerability, humility, even asking for help is huge, no matter what your role is. Melissa, bring it home for us.
Yeah, I think going back to what Nicole said about listening to your staff, we work with districts on 3 things. One is that if your teachers are complaining that they can't find information, take that step of doing the digital transformation, getting that information in one place that's accessible to every stakeholder, right? Whether it's using a secure box or Microsoft or a system like EdMod, really take that step. Or the other could be that streamlining of communication, trying to get that system in place. There's nothing worse than that miscommunication, that lost opportunity. Really trying to take those steps and using the technology that's available to really create more efficiencies for staff.
So well said. And we are officially out of time. So I do want to thank Melissa, Nicole, and Keith for sharing this information with our districts, and even more importantly, for all of the work in the areas that we talked about to support existing needs that all of you are leading in this area. I also would like to personally thank the team at Education Modified, first for the incredible support they are providing to educators and students to provide a more comprehensive, better special education experience, and second, for their partnership with us at Future Ready Schools Schools and the work that we are leading nationally. We would not partner with them if we did not believe in the work that they were leading. For more on Education Modified, make sure to visit educationmodified.com. I do want to remind our viewers that information about Future Ready Schools can also be found on futureready.org. We continue to challenge school district superintendents to join the over 3,500 others that have signed the Future Ready Pledge. We also encourage our school and district leaders to join us at one of this fall's Future Ready events, which we will be launching those dates soon. I also want to encourage our viewers to get involved with our growing strands from district leaders to technology leaders, principals, librarians, instructional coaches. We have vastly expanded the reach of Future Ready Schools in recent years and would love to see you connect there. So check out our private Facebook groups, ongoing activities to stay connected with those working alongside each of you throughout the nation as well. Finally, again, I want to thank Melissa, Nicole, and Keith, as well as thank all of you for investing your time as our viewers for joining us for this Future Ready webinar. Don't forget to connect with us here at Future Ready on Twitter at Future Ready and on Facebook at Future Ready Schools. If you missed any of today's conversation, it will be archived on our futureready.org/webinars webpage. Thank you again for joining us here at Future Ready Schools. Have a fabulous day.